The second half of this story is an emotional roller coaster, starting when the boys reach their breaking point, all the way till we look to 2024 and hope that the boys will eventually stop being punished. If you want to know how we got to this point, check out part 1 of the video in the description below. Now before we go into today's story, I'm OriKat and welcome to our channel. I deliver cases to you in the dramatisation format, so if that's something you enjoy, you'll be happy to know we upload once a week. As always, my aim is to give a voice to the victims and remember them as they were. So with that, let us begin. Towards the end of August 1989, Jose decided he wanted to take his family on a fishing trip, specifically to go fishing for sharks. They hadn't done much together this summer, so it was something they could all take part in. But not even a one-off family outing could fix everything that had gone wrong at this point. The crew working on the boat at the time even reported that if they hadn't known beforehand, they just wouldn't have known they were a family. No familiarity or love there at all. Jose was on his own at the back fishing, Kitty had retired into the cabin because she was suffering with seasickness, and then the two boys were just content to not have anything to do with their family, playing games on the bow of the boat. A day after, on the 20th of August 1989, just before 10 p.m, rising tensions within the family exploded. The boys, Lyle in particular, lost his temper during an argument with his father, in which they were talking about his treatment of Erik. Amongst the aggravation between Jose's words and the way he closed the door to the den whilst they were arguing, something he never did, Lyle took his father's anger as a threat. Therefore, Lyle pulled Erik out of the house whilst their parents were settling down in the den. Their parents believed their two sons were going to cool off. You see, the ideal thing about the Menendez mansion, especially for the boys, was it was set back from the street, concealed by dense foliage, and covered by an expensive security system. Typically, it was surrounded by a high iron fence and iron gates that barred people from entering the home unless they were opened manually. But on this very night, the gates were opened to park up the car and the security system was turned off. But little did Jose and Kitty know that together, Lyle and Erik pulled Mossberg 12-gauge shotguns out of Lyle's car and re-entered the house. They crept towards the family room, which was at the back of the house. The lights were already dimmed down low and the television was on. Jose was dozing on the couch, sitting to the end nearest to the doorway. His legs were stretched out in front of him, his feet on the coffee table. And next to him was the last scrapings of a berry and ice cream snack. Kitty was lying under a blanket, her body stretched across the couch, her head in Jose's lap. Seeing this, Lyle and Erik opened fire on their parents. Jose was originally hit with 2 shots, the proximity of the shotgun causing them to absolutely rip through him. One of the shots shattered the French doors just behind the couch. Jose was then hit in his left elbow and also was given 2 shots in the right arm. These shots immobilised Jose and allowed Erik to come up from behind and finish off with a fatal shot to the back of the head. Jose's lifeless body was left in the same position as when the boys originally came in. He was resting on the couch, his hands on his stomach and his feet on the floor. After the first shots were fired at Jose, Kitty regained awareness, and as soon as she woke up she realised she was covered in Jose's blood. She stood up screaming and tried to run away from the brothers, but she only made it a few steps before Lyle shot her too. He shot her in the right leg near her calf and in her right arm. Regaining her balance, Kitty tried to run away again, but she slipped on her own blood, allowing Lyle to do the finishing shot, which would officially immobilise her. Now that she was defenceless on the floor, the boys used up the last of their rounds. Because of this close range, a hit in her left thigh caused her whole leg to shatter. She was then shot in the right arm again and then her left breast, which consequently caused her lungs to fill up with blood. And even at this point, Kitty still wasn't dead. She was still trying to crawl away. Out of ammunition, Lyle rushed out of the house, reloaded his shotgun, and came back to deliver one more fatal shot into his mother's cheek. Jose, 45 at the time, was shot a total of 6 times. He was worth $14 million upon his death. Kitty, who was 47 at the time, took 10 shots, and it took her a lot longer to die. Lyle and Erik had been formulating this plan for a week, even to the point they had pre-brought the shotguns. It hadn't been definite that they were going to do it, but they had fantasised about what it would be like to be free from their parents. One such motivator for Erik was that he finally got the chance to be able to go out to college, away from his house, and strike out on his own. But unfortunately, Jose wanted Erik to stay and refused to pay for his tuition. So that was that. The future light in the tunnel that Erik had been looking forward to was just snuffed out. Not to mention, Sunday night absolutely offered itself on the platter to the boys, because it was the only day of the week the maid had off. After the murders, the brothers remained in the house, knowing that because of them being right in the middle of a residential area, the police would soon be called over other people hearing gunshots. In the meantime, whilst they waited for the police, Lyle shot both his parents in their left knees. Lyle then directed Erik to help him pick up all the shotgun shells, explaining that he had shot their parents in such a way that it would make it look like the mafia had done it. To the boys' surprise, the police did not turn up of their own volition, so Lyle had to call them himself. And when the police received this call, on the other end of the line was a devastated boy, hysterical as he told them that he had come home and found that his parents had been shot. But what was more haunting was the sound of Erik's screams in the background.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man,
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response. 722 North L105.
What happened? Hey, stay there,
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get to him further. Other units responding. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who?
I don't hear anything. I just came home.
You came home and found who shot?
My mom and dad. You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting. Get away from them.
Okay. Hey, let me talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay.
It's clear to hear that there is a lot of emotion in the boy's voice, even though they already knew what had happened, which suggested to me that there was likely 2 reasons for their reaction. The first one being that they wanted to make it convincing, and because of the high pressure situation, they were able to perform. But I'm sceptical if anyone could be that good of an actor. The second is that they actually had proper emotions to pull from when placing the 911 call. Because straight after the murder, and for a lot of time after, as we'll see, Erik just felt all this severe guilt over what they had done. So it was possible that because the boys had wanted to be from under their parents' thumbs for so long, that they were actually crying through relief. When the police got there, the Menendez brothers had an alibi ready and waiting, though it was Lyle who mostly talked them through it. Lyle walked the police through their day, starting with the fact that the 2 boys played tennis in the morning. After all, there was a tennis court behind their house. They then watched part of a tennis match on the television before heading out to spend their afternoon shopping at the Beverly Centre. Then around 5 p.m, they said they had made plans to go to the Taste of LA with a friend. The Taste of LA was a local food festival in Santa Monica that would be starting later that night. So at 8 p.m, the boys said they left their home and went to Westwood Village to be able to see the new James Bond film Licence to Kill. But when they saw the lines were too long, they opted to watch Batman at the Century City Mall instead. After Batman, the brothers drove to Santa Monica but got lost on the way, meaning they missed meeting up with their friend. Therefore, from a payphone, the brothers called up their friend they were meant to meet, Perry Berman. From this point onwards, Berman and the brothers made plans to meet at the Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills. So as Lyle told it, he said that he drove Erik home to pick up Erik's fake ID so they could buy some alcoholic drinks. That's when they said that they had stumbled upon the horrific sight of their parents laying dead in the den. It is worth noting that when the police originally arrived at the mansion, they were met with the sight of 19-year-old Erik sobbing on the lawn. He then got up and kept trying to bang his head on the tree whilst 21-year-old Lyle restrained him. Both boys were screaming how they couldn't believe what had happened. Initially, the police brought the brothers' story and didn't test for any gunshot residue on their hands. If they had done this that night, they would have instantly known who the real culprit of Jose and Kitty's deaths were. Also, they observed that nothing had been taken from the house, which did tip the police off that the culprit likely had to be someone that Jose and Kitty knew. Part of the investigation involved asking the boys what they thought had happened when they were brought in for questioning. During the interviews, the brothers were completely different. Lyle answered all the questions calm and methodically, whereas Erik was absolutely inconsolable. In the end, he couldn't even finish the interview. Lyle told the police he believed the mafia were involved, but the police weren't really convinced by this theory. They hypothesised that it either had to be a business rival of Jose's or a porn executive, who they knew had a bone to pick with Jose. Regardless of who was responsible, the police thought they knew one thing for certain, and that the motive was financial. During the aftermath of the deaths, Lyle and Erik tried to collect $5 million worth of life insurance on Jose, but due to technicalities they couldn't obtain it. 5 days later, on the 25th of August 1989, Lyle and Erik had to attend their parents' funeral. The other guests who were already there noticed that the boys had turned up over an hour late, and that their dispositions were completely different. Lyle looked reserved and guarded, observing the events taking place, whilst Erik looked really upset. In fact, his face was red and swollen from crying. In the months after the killings, the boys started to spend extravagantly on luxury items and business travels. Lyle in particular was really enjoying all the materialistic spending, whereas Erik was a bit more conservative about what he wanted to do with his half. The first thing Lyle brought with the inheritance money was Chuck's Spring Street Cafe, a buffalo wing restaurant in Princeton. It was one he used to like going to when they lived nearby. Considering when he was younger, one of Lyle's dreams was to open a restaurant, this wasn't a very surprising choice. On top of this, Lyle brought a Rolex and a Porsche Carrera. One thing Lyle liked to partake in was spontaneous spending. Sometimes he would just randomly jump out of the car on a whim and buy something. This was different to Erik, who instead spent his money on hiring a full-time tennis coach. This allowed him to compete in a series of tournaments in Israel. He also bought a Jeep Wrangler. Anything else of lesser importance that he bought was more or less encouraged by Lyle. The brothers eventually left the Beverly Hills mansion unoccupied, and instead they brought 2 adjoining condos in the Marina del Rey area. Only using it as a home base, the boys did like to dine extensively abroad, notably taking trips to London and the Caribbean. Collectively, the boys spent a total of $700,000, though it was later disputed that this was in line with their normal expenditure. It hadn't changed after the murders, and a lot of their luxury assets had been funded by Jose's life insurance. One of the most infamous moments regarding the 2 brothers, during the 6 months until they were caught, was a New York Knicks basketball game they attended. This particular moment became immortalised when they appeared in the background of a Mark Jackson trading card. This product was taken off the market when the company realised this. But focusing back on the police and their quest to find the real culprits, they had been keeping a close eye on Erik and Lyle's behaviour. And they perceived the boys' increased spending to be lack of empathy over their parents' deaths. Therefore, after checking out all the leads of all the other supposed perpetrators, they narrowed down their attentions on the brothers. Anyone else who had been suspected had enough evidence to prove otherwise, whereas the brothers didn't have any. So going ahead with this theory, the police tried to get a confession out of Erik. It is thought they saw him as the weaker one due to how he conducted himself during the original police interviews. Therefore, they pushed Craig Signorelli to wear a wire the next time he spoke to Erik. If you can remember, Craig Signorelli was Erik's best friend in high school. Erik and Craig met up at a beachfront restaurant in Israel. They got to talking for a bit and catching up, and then Craig just come out and asked him the question, "Did you kill your parents?" Erik became a lot more tense after this. He denied he had any involvement, and the lunch ended shortly after. After this, Erik returned to Beverly Hills briefly and got back in contact with his court-mandated therapist Jerome Oziel. Erik wanted to start working with him again. You see, unlike Lyle, who was really ready to grab life with both hands and move on, Erik was just suffering with such severe guilt. He wasn't in the same place as Lyle, and he was confused as to where his feelings were coming from. Was he feeling guilty because he'd taken his parents' lives, or was he feeling guilty because he was happy that they were gone? Then came the fateful day. Erik just couldn't take it anymore. Lyle kept telling him to be strong, but he just couldn't do it. Therefore, Erik met Dr. Oziel and told him basically everything. How himself and Lyle were involved in the murders, and how their father wasn't a very nice man and that they were putting their mother out of her depressive misery. Getting into the specifics, Erik told Oziel that this had all started when he was watching a miniseries called The Billionaires Boys Club. This was about a week before the murders. Lyle had eventually come in to watch it with him. After watching the miniseries, in which both boys realised that it resembled a lot with their own lives, they sat down and talked for a while. They first mentioned their shared belief of how Jose was planning to disinherit them from the will, and they just both agreed about how terrible their lives were. They thought they were captives in their own home due to Jose's domineering nature. Spurred on by this miniseries, this was when the brothers decided that they wanted to kill Jose. He held the power, he held the purse strings. They didn't think they could leave him without him finding them and sending someone to kill them. Simply put, they thought it was the best option. Erik told Oziel that the boys did foresee their mother being a problem at the time. They didn't want to get rid of her, but they couldn't see a way that they could kill their father without her being a witness. After all, Erik was of the mindset that there were two firm teams in the house. Throughout their childhoods, Kitty had always proven that she would take Jose's side again and again, whereas Erik's loyalties would always be with Lyle. At this point, Oziel became overwhelmed with Erik's confession. He told Erik to stop talking and that they should call Lyle and let him calm down for a while. Receiving the phone call, Lyle raced over to Oziel's office whilst Erik continued talking. He told Oziel how they had travelled to San Diego just to buy the shotguns, and now they thought they had committed the most perfect crime. They had been careful to clean up the shotgun casings, and they didn't have to worry about fingerprints because the crime had taken place in their own home. Once they had finished with the cleaning up, they had got into Erik's car and drove to Mulholland Drive, a winding road running to the San Fernando Valley. Erik at the time was too traumatised to drive, therefore Lyle had to do so instead. Getting to the location, the boys threw the shotguns into a nearby cavern before they headed to the gas station to dump their bloody clothing, their shoes, and their shell casings into a dumpster. Lyle actually wanted to go to the Cheesecake Factory for real, to buff up their alibi and still meet their friend Perry. But Erik was just crying too much, he didn't want to see any more people, so Lyle just drove him home. Which then takes us back to what we know. They had originally expected the police to come the first time they had actually killed their parents. When the police didn't turn up, the boys decided to get rid of the evidence, and then when they came back and saw that the police still hadn't been called, Lyle had to do it himself. When Lyle finally arrived at Oziel's office, he was absolutely furious at Erik for bungling the one thing he had to do. Consequently, Lyle kept reinforcing to Oziel that their father would be proud of committing such a well thought out crime, considering their father believed that nothing was off limits if you wanted to get something you desired. In the face of Lyle's explosive temper, Oziel did have to explain to the boys the difference between the crime that takes place in a moment of heated passion, such as during an argument, and a crime committed to reach a specific goal. The latter was the behaviour of a sociopath. So for a bit, Lyle and Erik looked at each other conflicted because they supposed they did fit both conditions. Although they had killed their parents due to the growing tensions at home, they had planned it beforehand. Though the difference was the boys believed their goal was to get away from their father's control. So was that really the makings of a sociopath? Regardless, as Oziel would later testify in court, Lyle answered that they must be sociopaths and resorted to threatening Oziel. Lyle told Oziel that if he did go ahead and believe the lies that Erik was spewing, then if Oziel told anyone else, then Lyle was going to kill him. After all this, Oziel confided in his mistress, Judalon Smith. Hearing of the boy's confession, she was mortified but did decide to hold on to the information for a bit. All until she'd found out that Oziel had left her and returned back to his wife. Therefore, this prompted Judalon to retaliate by going to the police and telling them of the boy's crimes. She told the police that there was even a recorded audio tape of Erik admitting to committing the murders. Though later she would say that she didn't actually do it out of retaliation at the time. Instead, she had found Oziel to be controlling and abusive, and that when one night he had decided to hit her, that's when she suddenly snapped. On the 8th of March 1990, Lyle was the first of the two brothers to be arrested for the murder of Jose and Kitty Menendez. And then 3 days later, on the 11th of March, Erik turned himself in at Los Angeles airport after having come back from Israel. When caught, the brothers were held without bail and jailed. It took 2 years for the boys to be trialled separately. This was mainly because the use of the therapist tapes were being appealed.
Jerome Oziel. O-Z-I-E-L.
All right, Mr. Curiel.
The trials happened in the month of August 1992, in which the court were able to possess recorded evidence of Erik saying that himself and Lyle were involved in the crime. This was given in by Erik's therapist Oziel. Out of the 3 tapes that were handed in, only 2 of them were used in court, whereas 1 of them was admissible. Oziel himself stated that because Lyle had broken doctor-patient privilege and had threatened him, that he was more than okay with handing the tapes in. During their court trial, the boys hired their own lawyer, Leslie Abramson. She campaigned for them passionately against the prosecution. In the court trial, which was televised to the entire nation, as the Menendez brothers took the stand, a whole dark story unravelled that pretty much blindsided everyone. In tearful statements, the boys told the jury that the reason they had killed their parents was through fear of abuse. As Lyle told it, on one of the nights he had had an argument with his parents, he went into a room and talked with Erik privately. And that was when Erik told him of something that was not only reflective of Lyle's own experiences, but something that was incredibly painful to share. It was during this moment Erik had told Lyle to the extent his father was abusing him, even going into detail about the ways he had molested him. After this, when Lyle confronted his father about it, Jose told the 2 boys that if they told anyone, he would kill them.
I thought they were going ahead with their plan to kill us.
The brothers emphasised to the jury that they had both suffered sexual abuse at the hands of their father. Lyle's was focused around the ages of 6 to 8 years old, whereas Erik's abuse stretched on a lot longer, from the age of 6 to the age of 19. Here is a clip of Lyle recounting the abuse.
just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this
and it
take
was
place?
in my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. It began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
Did you want to do this? At some point, did he do some other things to you?
Yes.
What else did he do to you?
He used objects,
What kind of objects?
a toothbrush, and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions, and just slide my pants down or take my pants off. Sometimes it would be for a short period of time, sometimes longer. Just lay me on the bed and he'd have a tube of Vaseline, and he just played with me.
And was there some point in time when he decided to use something besides the toothbrush?
Yes.
And did he try to anally penetrate you with something else?
He did.
And what was it?
He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
Did you ask him not to?
Yes.
How did you ask him not to?
I just told him, I don't. I'm sorry. I just told him that I didn't want to do this, and that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me, and he loved me.
Was that important to you, that he loved you?
Yes, very. But I still didn't want to do it.
Did you tell your mom?
Yes.
What did you say to your mom?
I told her to tell Dad to leave me alone. And he keeps touching me.
What did your mom say?
She told me to stop it. And that I was exaggerating. And that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
Did you ever tell anybody else?
When?
Did you ever tell anybody else when you were a child? You heard Diane Vandermolen testify. Do you
Yes.
remember telling her?
No.
Did you complain to your cousin Alan?
No, not about that.
Just about punishment. As a child, did you ever tell anybody else what had happened with your dad?
Yes. As a child, no.
Why not?
I was afraid, and my dad didn't want me to.
What did he tell you about telling people?
He just said that it was our secret. That bad things would happen to me if I told anybody. And I told him I never would.
How old were you when this stopped?
8.
So during the time between 6 and 8, when this was going on, did you tell your brother?
No.
Did you do something to your brother?
Yes.
What did you do to your brother?
I took him out to the woods. Whenever I felt, I don't know, I took him out sometimes, and I took a toothbrush also, and I played with Erik in the same way. And I'm sorry.
It stopped for you with your dad when you were 8. When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Erik.
And did you do something about it?
Yes.
What did you do?
I talked to my dad.
What did you say to your dad?
I told him that I knew what was going on with him and Erik, and I heard noises, and that I wanted him to leave Erik alone.
The boys described their father to be a paedophile and a cruel perfectionist, whereas their mother was completely self-absorbed and mentally damaged. They said their mother knew what Jose was doing but just didn't care enough to stop it. She was addicted to alcohol and drugs and actively encouraged violence against the brothers. Lyle even talked about one time in which Jose was away with work, in which Kitty came into his room and actually molested him. Here are further comments Lyle made on Kitty's inappropriate behaviour during court.
Would she ask you how she looked?
Yes.
And sometimes when she asked you how she looked, would she be inappropriately attired?
She would be topless. Usually just topless or like an open robe. And sometimes, with her clothes on.
And what ages are you talking about where she would expose herself to you this way?
Objection, the question was leading and mischaracterizing the testimony.
Overall. I was about 11.
She help you with your baths?
Yes.
How would she help you with your baths?
She would come in after I'd been in there a while. She would help wash my hair and wash me with a sponge.
How old are you talking about?
Same, 11 to 11 to 13.
And when you say she would wash you with the sponge, would she just wash your back or?
No, she would wash me everywhere.
She would wash your genitals?
Yes.
You slept in bed with your mom a lot, didn't you, even when you were little?
Yes.
And did you continue to sleep in her bed around this time when you're 11 and 12?
Sometimes.
And sometimes, did you touch your mom?
Yes.
Would your dad be in bed?
Sometimes.
And where would you touch her?
Everywhere.
Did she touch your back?
She kissed me, but she didn't touch me.
And how long did these things go on for?
Until I was 13, a little bit farther than that.
And when this was going on with your mom, was she nicer to you than she used to be?
No. She was worse.
And did it stop at some point?
It stopped a few months after I was 13.
Who stopped it?
I did.
How did she react to that?
She was furious and, she couldn't be too much worse, but she harassed me and we just sort of had arguments about and problems about that for a long time, a couple of years.
Was your
Really for my whole life, because it came out in other ways too.
Your relationship with your mother was never good before that, is that correct?
No.
Was it worse after that?
Oh yeah, she was just, she was pretty much zeroed in on me after that. Very, I don't know, she felt rejected. I don't know what she felt exactly, but it was a constant attacking.
Were you angry? Were you angry with her also?
Was I angry? I was very angry. I thought that it was unfair.
Why was it unfair?
Because we were doing this and she was enjoying it, and I was hoping that things were going to get better, for a whole relationship and things might get better. And she got worse.
Did you think she was going to love you if you did these things?
I took it to be love. And that's what I wanted.
Did you always have problems with her after that about your girlfriends?
I always had problems with her, with my girlfriends, yes.
And after all of this stopped with your mother, did she show you specifically that she was unhappy that it had stopped, or she was angry about it?
She harassed me.
What do you mean she harassed you?
She just kept exposing herself, picking me up at the clubs with, in a robe, exposed, leaving her underwear around, calling me into the room when she knew that she was, changing, asking me if she looked pretty, and called me a liar when I said yes. Sometimes she would be in a tantrum, and then she would come over and she would touch my face real gentle, like she was going to kiss me, and then she would go back into a rage. And she was very upset. And I think I think maybe Diane being in the house later upset her more.
On the other hand, Erik admitted that for a small period of time, he had actually admired his father, despite his brutal, torturous nature. Because his father had been the one who had taught him the definition of success. And considering his father didn't even look twice at him, it was the only attention he got, no matter how horrific it was. But sometimes their father would even use rape as a punishment. For example, after the tennis game, the one a few weeks before Lyle and Erik killed their parents, Jose took Erik into his room and raped him for losing.
You said at some point your father had anal sex with you. Is that right?
Yes.
And how old do you believe you were when that happened?
I was in 6th grade. I guess, I'm pretty sure I was 12.
And was that within a year of the episode you previously described at 11?
Yes.
Now, you've mentioned earlier that he had made some efforts to accomplish anal intercourse with you that had been unsuccessful because it hurt you?
Yes.
And therefore he had stopped?
Yes.
And that was before the incident when you were 11 when he was violent, is that right?
Yes.
Now, when you were 12, do you recall the day that he succeeded?
Yes.
And was that a gentle process or not?
No, not at all.
What was it, Mr. Menendez?
It was very, very painful.
And do you know if on that occasion anyone else was in the home besides yourself and your father?
No, I was alone in the house with my dad.
Now, was there a part of your bed that was removable?
Yes.
And what was that part?
It was a wooden slat that there were many of them under my bed, but he had taken one off and left it off.
He being whom?
My father.
And when had he done that, removed one and left it off?
Early on.
I don't know what that means.
Early on, when I guess I was, before anything bad started to happen. It must have been 9,
Before you were 11?
10. Yes.
But you were living in Pennington?
Yes.
And what would he do with the slat that he took off from the bed?
He would wedge it underneath the door, underneath the doorknob, and the carpet.
So that no one could open the door from the outside?
Yes.
And I think you've already said your mother never came to the door anyway.
No.
So did you have in mind at the time who that slat was supposed to keep out?
Well, I thought it was to keep out anyone from coming in the room. It just happened that no one came to the room ever, but I didn't know.
Who were the candidates? Who were the other people who lived in this house?
My mother and my brother. And at some time, Diane.
When Diane lived with you?
Yes.
Now, on this particular occasion, nobody else is home?
No.
No?
No one else is home.
Okay. And do you recall basically what happened?
Yes.
Basically what happened?
My dad came in and told me to take off my clothes and to kneel on the bed. And he closed the blinds and he put the slat underneath the door like he always did. And he told me to bend over the footboard.
This bed had a footboard and a headboard?
Yes.
And did you know what it meant to be told to bend over the footboard?
Yes.
He had had you do that before?
Yes. That's when he tried to have sex with me but wasn't able to.
And did your father put anything on you or ask you to put anything on you?
This time he just did it himself. Usually he told me to.
What was it that was put on you?
He had a Vaseline jar.
And in the past, when he had tried to do this, he had had you put the Vaseline on?
Yes, he put some on himself, and had me put them on myself.
On this occasion, he put it on you?
Yes.
And what happened?
And he lined himself up and he started going into me like he had always done, but this time he was going in too far. And I said, "Dad, please stop." And I said, "Dad, you're hurting me." And he just kept on going further. At one point, I just started screaming, and I started saying, "Stop, it hurts, it hurts." And he just went all the way in.
And did that hurt?
Yes.
And how did you react to that pain?
I just sort of died off. I stopped screaming, and I just sort of left myself.
You left yourself?
I just pretended that it wasn't happening. I pretended that the pain wasn't happening, and I just went away in my mind. It was too painful.
When it was over, did you cry?
I was crying during it.
Okay. And after it was over, were you still crying?
Yes.
And did your father say anything to you at that time?
Yeah, he had a towel on the bed, and he put the towel on the bed, and he had me sit on the towel so that I wouldn't get anything on the bed. And he said, very calmly, and looked at me, and told me to look him in the eyes, and he said, "Next time you ever scream or yell, I'm going to beat you so bad you'll never be able to scream or yell again."
Did it occur to you, did something occur to you about this episode concerning why he had gone ahead when you were in pain?
Yes.
What was that?
It was because when I had screamed or yelled or cried out before, he had told me that if I ever did that, he was going to go all the way inside of me.
That was on a previous occasion when he was trying to do this?
Yes.
So he kept his word?
Yes.
Did you believe, Mr. Menendez, as you were growing up, that your father was a person who would make good on his threats?
Oh, yes.
Now, did your father, in this particular conversation after this episode, strike that. Your father said to you that if you scream again, he'll make sure he hits you hard enough that you won't be able to cry or scream again?
Yes.
And did he explain to you whose fault that would be?
Yes, he asked me whose fault it would be. He asked me if I understood, and I said yes. And he said, "So if I ever do that, do you understand whose fault it'll be, or do you know why it will happen?" And I said yes.
Okay. And whose fault would it be?
He made it very clear that it would be my fault, and I understood that it would.
What did you do, if anything, after this episode? Did your father leave after he had told you it would be your fault?
Yes, he left and he closed the door.
And when he told you this about whose fault it would be, what kind of mood was he in?
He was in a very stern, very serious, very strong mood.
And what did you do after he had left?
I sort of waited outside the door in my bedroom, listening to see where he had gone, and then just went to my bathroom and got in the tub.
Took a bath?
I took a hot bath and just promised myself to do whatever he wanted, never to scream, never to yell, never to cry. Just do what he wanted when it happened.
Now, over the preceding couple of years, talking about now you're 12 when this happened, is that right?
Yes.
Over the previous couple of years, had, in the incidents with your father, had the talking stopped?
Oh, yes. No, he told me that he didn't want me to say a word when he spoke, and he talked about silence. When he talked, he would talk, but he would never want me to say a word unless he spoke to me. And when he talked, he would give me lectures about silence, about the Romans, about the Greeks. He would lecture me about different things.
During the sex or during the visits that included sex? Is
Either
that what
while I was getting dressed or while I was undressing. Sometimes in the middle, but usually not.
And were you allowed to talk?
No, not unless I was asked a question.
And did silence become the pattern?
Yes, he told me all about silence.
What about silence, Mr. Menendez? What did he tell you?
He told me that silence was the greatest thing that man had. He said that it was the greatest power that anyone could achieve, and that with silence you could control anyone.
And was there a time then when the sexual episodes with your father were totally and completely silent?
Yes.
When he would say nothing whatsoever?
Yes, then it would be silent.
And you would say nothing whatsoever?
Yes.
This was all backed up by the brother's cousin, Andy Cano, who was more of a similar age to Erik and was someone Erik had confided in. In court, Andy Cano mentioned that when he and Erik were younger, Erik used to talk about these really awful but odd-sounding things. And looking back on it when he was older, Andy soon realised that what Erik was doing was recounting his sexual abuse, talking about things like how he got a penis massage from his father.
When you were 10 years old, how old was Erik?
He was 12 and a half. He asked me if my dad ever gave me massages. He was actually trying to find out if any of these massages were normal. And my response to him was that I wouldn't know. I didn't have a father around. My parents were divorced then. And I really couldn't help him.
What did he say about where the massages were?
Well, he told me his father was massaging his dick.
He used that word?
Yes, he did. What I do remember very specifically was him asking me to make a promise to him never to reveal that to anybody. And he was saying it very seriously, and I took it very seriously. He explained to me that these massages that his father was giving him were beginning to hurt.
Diane Vandermolen also took to the stand and backed up what Lyle had told her years ago. So at this point, the brothers had multiple family members that had attested to Jose's true nature and also acknowledged that there was abuse going on. The court were also shown pictures of Lyle and Erik's genitals that were taken when they were the respective ages of 6. But what came as a surprise was, despite Oziel's testimony against the boys, Judalon actually came to their defence. She said that Oziel had forced a confession out of Erik, and that the evidence shouldn't be used and that it wasn't accurate. Notably, Lyle's prosecutor at the time, Pam Bozanich, argued in the face of the boys' abuse claims, saying that their real motive was to inherit their father's multi-million-dollar estate, and that their tears on the stand were nothing but the abilities of good actors. She also claimed they were lying in famously stating that men couldn't be raped because they lacked the necessary equipment to be raped.
Mention, first of all, that men cannot be raped since they lack the necessary equipment to actually be raped. And it's a people's position.
She also commented that the inappropriate photos taken of the brothers' genitals were done by themselves to garner sympathy. Leslie Abramson argued that the motive could not have been financial because even when the boys committed the crime, they had just fully presumed that they had been left out of their father's will. 4 months later in December, the Los Angeles grand jury came to their verdicts in both Lyle and Erik's cases. In both cases, the jury were hung and couldn't decide on the sentencing. This made the court declare a retrial in which during the second time the two boys were trialed together. But in the second trial, a rule was passed that the sexual abuse argument in defence of the boys could not be used. The second trial came in 1993 and was less publicised because Judge Stanley Weisberg didn't want to allow cameras in the courtroom. The brothers went to court again on murder charges, but then this time the court couldn't decide whether the boys had partaken in first-degree murder or manslaughter. Abramson tried to argue that the boys came from a violent, traumatising, horrific home, and that they even had this physical evidence to back up that Erik showed signs that he'd been raped. The jury eventually decided that they wanted to vote on manslaughter charges, but the judge didn't let them. Instead, he gave them two options for the boys, either the death penalty or life in prison without parole. It didn't help the boys' case that their lawyer, Leslie, had been caught trying to alter one of the witness statements during the court trial. Even though she wasn't admonished over this, it was noted. So reviewing the evidence again, the jury had to factor out the abuse defence. They rejected the conclusion that the boys killed their parents out of fear, and instead said that they had done it to gain their father's wealth. This was so different to all the other previous juries who had leaned more on the boys' side and thought they were telling the truth. On the 2nd of July 1996, Lyle and Erik Menendez were sentenced to 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and their charges were to be served consecutively. And I just passionately want to say I don't believe either of those two boys should have got such a harsh sentencing. Because to refer back to one of my previous cases on the channel, suspected serial killer James Worley was faced with either life imprisonment or the death penalty, like Lyle and Erik. Granted, his trial was a long time after the Menendez trial, but he was someone who had been seriously hoping and intending for his victims to suffer over a prolonged period of time. Every crime he committed was thought out with so much premeditation. He was also a serious repeat offender. So it begs the question, why were the two boys viewed and judged in such a way that resembled the likes of how Ted Bundy was treated in his trial at the time? The boys were sent to separate prisons and were immediately declared a danger to society and the other inmates. For a time they were kept in high-max prisons in complete isolation from other prisoners. The same day they were sentenced, Lyle married a woman called Anna Erickson, at a ceremony attended by his lawyer Leslie Abramson and his aunt Marta Menendez. This was officiated by Judge Nancy Brown. 2 years later, on the 27th of February 1998, the two brothers appealed their sentencing, but the California Court of Appeals held up their murder convictions. They then tried again on the 28th of May, but this time the Supreme Court of California just didn't listen to any of their appeals at all, threw them straight out. In 1999, both brothers submitted a habeas corpus petition with the Supreme Court of California. These petitions were a legal order that asked the jury to review if the defendants had been sentenced lawfully. Both of the brothers' petitions were denied. After this, the brothers had pretty much exhausted all their options appealing to the state courts. So their last plan of action was to file separate habeas corpus petitions to the United States District Court. Whilst they were waiting for the permissions to come through, on the 12th of June 1999, Erik married Tammy Ruth Sackerman, a pen pal he had met in prison. He was at Folsom State Prison at the time. The two of them married in the prison waiting room, and their wedding cake was a single Twinkie. When Erik and Tammy originally met, Tammy was already married, but every time she went to see him, she could just see pain in his eyes that she understood herself. During this period, Tammy had confessed that she had found out that her husband had been molesting her own daughter, and that after she found out this news, she broke it off with him. Erik comforted her through this entire ordeal. 2 years after this, on the 1st of April 2001, Anna Eriksson divorced Lyle after discovering that he was cheating on her with another woman. The boys heard back on their most recent appeals on the 4th of March 2003. A magistrate judge recommended a denial of the petitions. Therefore, the district court adopted this recommendation. After having a serial lack of success, with the American courts refusing to hear them out, the brothers then decided to appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. In November 2003, Lyle married again, this time to a woman named Rebecca Sneed. Rebecca was a journalist turned attorney who Lyle had known for the last 10 years. They had their wedding in the prison visiting area of the Mule State Creek Prison, and from there on talked every day on the phone. 2005 came around, and shortly into the year, Tammy Sackerman released a book on her life with Erik and what those type of long distances relationships were like whilst one person was in prison. It is known Erik heavily supervised and edited the book. But one of the more notable things Tammy mentioned was how her family had not agreed to their marriage at all. Not that she cared, because what was important was that she loved him and her daughter did too. They would drive over 240 kilometres every weekend to see Erik, and her own daughter even called him her Earth Dad. On the 7th of September 2005, a three-judge panel denied another set of habeas corpus petitions coming from the two brothers. Though the current head judge at the time, Alex Kalinsky, noted that during the original trial, the active judge had flip-flopped a lot on what he thought should be a worthy sentencing for the boys. The boys remained in separate prisons until February 2018, when Lyle was moved from Mule Creek State Prison to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility. They were housed in separate units originally, though Lyle kept in contact with Erik every day by sending letters and even playing chess matches through the post. Finally, after 22 long years, on the 4th of April 2018, Lyle and Erik were finally moved into the same housing unit in the same prison.
We will spend the rest of our life in prison. If we're not put in the same prison, there's a good probability I will never see him again. And that would be very, very difficult to live through.
They would, until earlier this month, Lyle finally transferred to the same Southern California prison as his brother, that grin on his face saying it all. And now he's speaking out to Daily Mail TV for the first time about that reunion.
I ended up bursting into tears. It was just quite an emotional moment, almost unexpectedly so. I think for me, I thought maybe I'd just be numb. It was just something I wasn't sure was ever going to happen. It was just a remarkable moment.
The unit was reserved for inmates who agreed to take part in rehabilitation programs without creating disruptions. The brothers started their journey in the courts together and ended it with each other. When they first saw each other, they hugged immediately and burst into tears, because up until this point they just didn't think the courts would ever allow them to reunite again. Unfortunately, after this there was little movement in the case, People have been working tirelessly outside of the prison to get the boys a fair hearing, but so far the courts just aren't interested. Until recently, of course, when the boy from the Brazilian boy band Menudo, Roy Rosello, released a tell-all interview on the segment of The Today Show. This came on the 18th of April 2023, where Rosello revealed that he believed he had been drugged and raped by Jose Menendez when he was visiting the Menendez home in New Jersey at the age of 14. From this interview, rumours then surfaced that Ricky Martin may have gone through something similar, though this was never confirmed.
Menudo started the boy band craze. At the peak of their fame, their popularity was on the scale of the Beatles. Ricky Martin was its most famous member. In a new 3-part documentary now streaming on Peacock, former Menudo singer Roy Rosello claims he was drugged and raped by Jose Menendez in the mid-'80s. Menudo had just signed with RCA Records, where Menendez was a top executive. On a recorded call from prison, Erik Menendez says he remembers the Menudo teenager coming to their mansion.
When they were over at the house, he had a private meeting with boys one at a time.
The documentary claims Jose Menendez was obsessed by Menudo.
My dad was one of the guys that was choosing the new members of the group.
May 2023 so far has seemed to be the turning point for the brothers. The media latched onto the case again, spreading around about how the boys had put forward so many habeas corpus petitions and how they had all been denied. Not only this, but remember Andy Cano, the cousin of the boys, who testified in their earlier court trials? Well, tragically, Andy Cano did take his life not too long after the boys were put in prison. And this was presumably because he was burdened by everything he was holding in about Lyle and Erik's childhoods. But as of 2024, Andy's mother has now found letters in which Erik sent to Andy when he was younger, detailing all the abuse that went on in the house. One of the letters was as follows: "I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy. But it's worse for me now. I can't explain it. Every night I stay up thinking you might come in. I need to put it out of my mind. I know what you said before, but I'm afraid. You just don't know Dad like I do. He's crazy. He warned me 100 times about telling anyone." Now in prison, it has been reported that Lyle, 56 years old, and Erik, 54 years old, work to help and counsel other inmates who have gone through sexual abuse. Erik in particular helps care for terminally ill prisoners and leads multiple self-help groups. Though it is unclear what the future holds for the Menendez brothers, there is hope that 2024 might be the year they finally get their justice. And their current lawyer agrees with this.
Well, we've had what I would say I'm cautiously optimistic about. We filed in May what's called a writ of habeas corpus. We cited the explosive allegations from the Menudo member and a letter that was excluded. And now we have got what's called a request for a informal reply from the DA's office that was issued by the judge where we filed it. So we're very, very, I wouldn't say optimistic, but cautiously optimistic that the tide has changed, that we have now compelling evidence.
For me, there are some talking points about this case which are pertinent to discuss. A lot of them surround the boys' motivations for committing the crime in the first place. For example, one of the main things the prosecution used in their argument during the court trial was the boys' excessive spending of the money. But I don't believe their spending was in line with what aggressive offenders would do if they came into a lot of money. For example, they would spend it on lots of drugs, alcohol, and probably an excessive amount of luxury cars. I personally believe they did snap, even though they had planned the murder for a week. This is because, as I said earlier, they had gone through such severe abuse. Not to mention their teachers and therapists said they believed the boys to be emotionally stunted. One even said in particular that Lyle's mentality may not be much more than an 8-year-old when it comes to impulse control and reasoning. After everything they had been through, I just don't believe that they could have acted with any prevailing logic. Plus, when you look at the facts, shooting off rounds like that in the middle of Beverly Hills like the boys did isn't as premeditated as some might make it seem. If it wasn't reactive and it was all planned out, like the courts had originally said, then why didn't the boys do something quieter or even less messy? In fact, if they were so cold-hearted, why didn't they make it more painful? Consequently, surely the actions of their cousin backs up their claims even more, considering Andy did overdose on sleeping pills and that it was even his family who had said he just couldn't cope with the trauma anymore. Also, at the time the media largely decided to villainise the brothers, I believe this came from people being blinded by the tax bracket the boys came from. There is a common misconception that rich people can't at all be unhappy because they just don't understand all the troubles and horrors that more unfortunate people go through. But money does not protect you from emotional, physical and sexual abuse. Not only this, but at the time the case was a really big shock to the nation, especially because male abuse and male sexual assault was just not something that was talked about. People weren't ready to acknowledge it, and they just weren't ready to have discussions about it. I personally believe that the brothers have suffered their whole lives, and that they have served more than enough time. And with their new documentary coming out, hopefully they get their story heard.
I don't think it was a crime. It is a crime by statement, but they killed from fear. They felt that they would be killed if they didn't kill. That's my own personal opinion. I think that they were just panicking, and that was the only, because I do know that after they killed them, both sat down and cried. They cried for hours. And it's marvelous that they are together, and it's marvelous that they are able to look at each other and love each other and remember that they have never forgotten each other. Because when you don't have somebody with you, you wonder, do they remember me? My joy would be that they would be set free, that they would be able to be human beings on a normal basis and not behind bars. They've been behind bars many, many years. I would love to see them free.
Thank you for listening to today's case. Comment yes or no down below as to whether the Menendez brothers should be free.